So you recently celebrated your 20th anniversary with the company. Hospitality industry, as many of you probably know, has incredibly high turnover, but Marriott has been an exception to this rule for a long time. I believe it's something like 13,000 of your employees have 20 years plus.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a substantial achievement. It's one reason they're a great place to work company year after year. And in addition, Marriott has something like it's 200,000 plus employees worldwide, if you count.
Yeah, close. Our model's a little complicated because in many of the hotels we run outside the U.S., they're not legally our employees. They're employees of the owner. But we think we have about 675,000 people that wear our name badge every day.
Right.
And we want them to feel very much like they're part of our family.
And that must be a challenge, just the sheer scope of that. I mean, that's a bigger company than most people in the room are representing. Can you talk a little bit about the difficulty of managing that sort of take care of the associates culture across such a wide network?
Yeah, we've had, of course, fabulous to build on the legacy that you just heard Mr. Marriott describe. And for 90 years to have a family which sort of approaches the business as a family business with an extraordinarily long-term focus, which I think is a powerful trait because it causes you to think not necessarily about hitting next month's numbers, for example, but instead, how do we continue to lead 10 years from now? Or 20 years from now, and it causes you to make different decisions. But that legacy is really powerful. I think we just heard Mr. Marriott describe, and for 90 years to have a family which sort of approaches the business as a family business with an extraordinarily long-term focus, which I think is a powerful trait because it causes you to think not necessarily about hitting next month's numbers, for example, but instead, how do we continue to lead 10 years from now? Or 20 years from now, and it causes you to make different decisions. But that legacy is really powerful. I think we heard Mr. Marriott describe, and for 90 years to have a family which sort of approaches the business as a family business with an extraordinarily long-term focus, which I think is a powerful trait because it causes you to think not necessarily about hitting next month's numbers, for example, but instead, how do we continue to lead 10 years from now? Or 20 years from now, and it causes you to make different decisions. But that legacy is really powerful. I think as we grow bigger and bigger, what becomes clearer is the principal ambassadors of our culture are not sitting on this stage, but are the general managers of the individual hotels. Because they are the folks that our associates around the world are going to look to and say, okay, do they in fact care about me? And again, caring here is about opportunity, it's about pride in work, it's about being empowered, it's about really feeling good in your job, not simply this sort of paternalistic idea of we love you, although obviously we should be communicating that too. But so the challenge is how do you make sure we're getting the right GMs? How do we make sure we're training them? How do we make sure we're sort of celebrating the cultural successes? And we have a whole bunch of things we do throughout the year to drive that sort of encouragement, if you will, to say culture is important. And we're going to be able to see it and touch it through associate surveys and other things regularly through the year.
What's an example of an event like that, maybe one that you've been part of recently that established that or reinforced that value?
So we had a Marriott Awards of Excellence last week in Washington, which we've done every year as long as I've been at the company. And basically we bring in a dozen or so associates from around the world. They are overwhelmingly hourly associates, not exclusively, that's not a requirement. Many of them have never been to Washington before. Many of them have never been outside their own countries if they're coming from abroad. Sometimes never been on an airplane before. And they come and tell stories that are often extraordinary and reduce us all to sort of jelly by the end of the night. They come and they give a sort of acceptance speech at the end. There's a little video that portrays their lives, but it might be so for example, one of the women who won last week started in Turkey, ended up in Russia before coming to the United States, moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, had worked for us for 20 years. But in the video, you see this picture of her with her 3 kids in front of a house wearing an Apple Watch. And you hear her tell this story about coming and working, and with the predictability of work that she feels proud about, raising kids, buying a house, sending them off to college, doing the things that we sort of can take for granted.
Sure.
And it's an extraordinarily powerful story, which is then amplified by guest testimonials, which is why she surfaces in an award ceremony like that, because people say, this woman I see when I stay in that hotel, and she makes me feel welcome like nobody else.
And what kind of job does she do as an hourly associate? Is she housekeeping? Is she front desk? Is she what role does she play, or what kind of role does that category cover?
She's basically overseeing the breakfast and that interchange with people at the start of the day. As I hope you're all travelers, and I hope you stay with us frequently, but we are at our most tender and personal in the morning, often. And this is true for travelers all around the world. We want a breakfast which is comforting to us. We're just getting going, sometimes in a strange place. And when you see somebody like that who makes you feel like you're home, or you've got some attributes of being home, it's a really powerful service point.
Thank you for tender and personal, which is a great euphemism for what I usually feel, which is more sort of raw and grumpy.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But I think we can all relate to the experience of the stranger's face that kind of lights things up.
You're not a morning person, is that what you're saying?
I'm learning to become one, thanks to retraining and a lot of coffee. But talking about this category of hourly associates, if you look at the current kind of political and economic climate, there's a general concern in the States right now to back up a little bit, when I was a kid in California, my high school classmates included people whose parents were immigrants, and their first job was a hotel job, usually an hourly thing, housekeeping, kitchen, something like that. Those entry-level jobs were a first rung on a ladder that could lead to exactly what it did for this associate you were describing. There's a lot of concern right now that those kinds of jobs don't create those kinds of opportunities the way that they used to, and I'm wondering if that's something that you grapple with this great workforce that includes so many hourly wage people. How does Marriott address this and make people feel like opportunities are available?
We talk about it all the time, and I think the opportunities are still there. The housekeepers are a group that I talk about most frequently, and they are my heroes. They are usually women. They're usually diminutive women. They're often immigrants. They work extraordinarily hard. None of us are at our best when we're in hotel rooms.
No.
It's like, have you ever washed a rental car? Do you ever make your own bed in a hotel room? Do you throw your stuff away, or do you just kind of leave it there? And so they come in and they do what is really selfless work. Over and over, though, they do it for years, and they do it with pride. And we've done something. So for a few years ago, for example, we started having the ability to essentially assign the same rooms to the same housekeeper every day, and hear back from guests and know how guests were responding to that housekeeper's work. And when we started talking about that, I thought, oh my goodness, that's a little much. How are they going to react to that? Is that putting too much pressure on them? And in fact, it was just the reverse. They said, I want to know how I'm performing, because these are rooms I'm taking care of, and I'm gonna win these customers. And so there's an extraordinary pride there. We want to obviously make sure that we get the pay and benefits right, which we hope we do. But we also want to make sure that we are building a relationship with these housekeepers where they can feel that kind of pride in their work, and actually get to a point where they feel like there's dignity in this work. And I suspect every industry is represented out here. One of my pet peeves often in multi-industry things is the conversation about work often goes immediately to the high-tech space, and how important the high-tech space, and of course it is for our society. But these service jobs are jobs that deserve extraordinary dignity, and people should have with pride, and people should not. People shouldn't feel bashful about saying, I work in the hotel business, or I work in the restaurant space. And when you actually look at the trends in employment, we got great tech companies, to be sure, and they're changing people's lives. But in every city around the world, we've got microbreweries, microdistilleries, artisanal coffee. We've got bakeries. We got restaurants popping up, and they're popping up by folks who say, I want to be involved, engaged with people, creating something that I can be proud of, and sort of seeing the response. And we shouldn't pretend that that's not happening, because more and more of us are going to be serving more and more of us because of the way our economy is growing.
And these are core things that serve core needs: shelter, food. I mean, the things that take that tender and personal moment and set the tone for the quality of our day. And so
needs are the things we enjoy the most.
Yes. I had a Marriott-related experience. Early on in my marriage, I splurged a little bit for an anniversary, and I took my wife for a weekend at a Ritz-Carlton property.
Excellent.
And when you stay at a Ritz-Carlton, which, if you've been lucky enough to do that, they have a card that you'll see when you enter your room that says, "The ladies and gentlemen of the Ritz-Carlton look forward to helping you." And the tone that sets, that the work they are doing is valuable, and ranks them among ladies and gentlemen, that there's not some kind of class distinction between you and the people who work in the service economy. I think it's a really important tone to set. Yeah. And anyway, glad to know that.
I hope you had a good weekend. Yeah.
It was very good, actually. This particular hotel also let me rent a dog, so you can't beat that. Actually.
How about that?
I feel like I'm gushing too much about such.
Yeah, maybe just leave that. We don't know. We don't need more details.
Ask me later about my dog. Mr. Marriott mentioned earlier this great challenge of the Starwood acquisition, and almost instantly you're multiplying the number of hotels under your umbrella by something like 50% and taking on many, many more employees as well. I'd love to talk a little more about the culture challenges involved with that. First of all, just if you don't mind briefly sort of talking a little bit about the business rationale kind of driving the decision. Yeah. Why was it important for Marriott to make this move at this time?
Yeah, so this, some of it, too much of it played out in the newspapers, of course, but in early 2015, Starwood, which has long been one of our principal competitors, put itself up for sale. And so it obviously starts a process, which is more than just an abstraction. Often you might say, should we buy X, Y, or Z? But X, Y, or Z may not be for sale, and they may refuse to be for sale even if you think you want to buy them. Well, here was a company that was for sale. We looked at it first, and we decided we weren't interested. And we thought it was a lot of work, and a little bit the flavor of Mr. Marriott's comments. We were performing extraordinarily well, and this looked like a really big job. And the economics didn't feel quite compelling enough. And so we initially passed. We then, over the course of the summer of 2015, are engaged in conversations with a number of our tech partners, the online travel agents, the Expedia and Priceline, met with Google, had time with Facebook, all of whom are deeply engaged in the travel space in one way or another, sometimes as middlemen who are selling our rooms and trying to sell more of our rooms so they can collect commission. And the way those unfolded, we thought, you know what, if we build an even bigger loyalty program, Marriott Rewards and SPG, now about 100 million members, that is the way for us to have a stronger relationship directly with our customers. By offering them more choice, we have the ability to say, why would you stay anywhere else? And really drive sort of that connection. And so the strategic importance of the deal became stronger over the course of those months of thinking and analysis. The economics also got better because of the relative shift of the stock prices, and nobody else had really stepped up to do the deal at terms that were compelling. So there was a window for us in late 2015, which was really more lucky than smart in some respects, but we decided we would jump at it. The other thing that Mr. Marriott has said at times is companies like this come for sale only every 10 years or longer. And if you don't jump at them forever, you'll look back and say, well, should we have done it? And so we jumped in. Now, how do you maintain a culture in the midst of all that?
Sure.
We've just completed 8 global general managers meetings, the first that we've done since closing the Starwood deal. And it was sort of a grueling, from Toronto to Mexico City, Dubai, London, Macau, a number of United States destinations, ranging in size from about 200 to about 4,000, which was the group in New Orleans. And by bringing people together, talking together about the strategy and the important issues for the company, building relationships, letting people, sort of touch and feel the culture of the company, and sort of celebrating to some extent. There's nothing that builds culture like success. And so when the team thinks, you know what, we're accomplishing something, that too is something that gives them power and pride in their work.
Did you feel that Starwood had a distinctive sort of culture of its own prior to the acquisition that differed from Marriott in significant ways?
I think the more you're at the hotel level, the more the culture is similar, because hotel people understand that in order to succeed, they have really got to have a team. A general manager who doesn't know his or her people and treat them the way they deserve to be treated will not be successful for long. And so no matter what the corporate culture is above that, there's a much more commonality there than dissimilarity. At the corporate level, I think the cultures were a bit different in some respects. Marriott has long been an operating culture, which you see from somebody like Mr. Marriott and his parents, who were deep into the details of what's happening in this hotel or this restaurant. So it's a real operating DNA. Starwood was much more a marketing and branding DNA. And so that actually can be quite complementary, though, because we're obviously needing to do both things.
Sure.
So trying to bring in the right talent and trying to make sure we embrace that piece as well.
So do you feel that they're adding things to your cultural DNA that maybe Marriott didn't have as much of before?
They're absolutely adding expertise, yeah. And I think I'm hopeful we were already doing some things around innovation and branding and starting new brands and doing a number of things before we closed the Starwood acquisition. But it brings us that much more in that space.
And Mr. Marriott also referred to this as a bigger company, as more hotels are opening, you've got more opportunities for the people within the family. I mean, does this mean that for some of these long tenured Marriott veterans, are there more places to go, more roles to fill at maybe different brands that weren't part of the portfolio before?
Absolutely. You end up with both just the bigger size immediately, and so that means there are that many more positions that will open naturally because of retirements or whatever other decisions that happen. And of course, you've got the growth, which we talked about, which is this new hotel every 14 hours for 3 years, which is a stunning figure to us, let alone to everybody else. And we sometimes wonder how we're going to get it done. But people want those opportunities, and they, just a couple of stories. Last fall, we opened a new Marriott in Kigali, Rwanda. And I don't know how many of you have been to Rwanda. I'm sure you all know the story. It's only 20 years ago, there was a genocide that cost 1 million lives in 90 days. Most people killed by knife, machete, not by anything less personal than that. So a sort of horrific event. The economy has grown well. Now there's a beautiful Marriott hotel with about 220 people that make permanent jobs there. 37 women who came out of the Aquila Girls' School, which is nearby, every one of whom's lives were impacted by this genocide. And they now have jobs with a predictability that they couldn't only dream about, and an extraordinary optimism about the future. And some of those women will go on to be managers of that hotel or other hotels in Africa or in our regional headquarters in Dubai or someplace else in the world for the company, and that will be great. But for every single one of them, that job is transformative. Closer to home, in the midst of all these GM's tours, we were in Dallas. I met with the general manager of the W in Dallas, started as a doorman in Seattle 20 years before, now running a gleaming hotel, and simply following that up on the legacy Starwood platform, but following his career through effort and skill and all the other, and luck and all the things that build into that. And the stories, go from that starting job in Rwanda all the way to the pretty fancy senior executive job of a GM of a W. And there are thousands of those stories across the company, and there are thousands of those stories that have yet to be told.
As the company gets more global, you'd mentioned opportunities for women in the Kigali hotel. Rwanda isn't necessarily specifically an example of this, but I imagine you must operate in some cultures where cultural constraints hold back, for example, the seniority that a woman can reach, or maybe there are caste differences, for example. How does Marriott navigate that? I mean, I know you must have to give a certain amount of autonomy to local managers to not violate local standards, and at the same time you have standards of your own to uphold. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, just last week we were hearing from some of our hotels in Saudi how actually quickly some change is beginning to happen. And I know from an American lens, we all say, can it happen faster? And how on earth could you still put up with this? But we have women associates working in our hotels in Saudi. Just a few years ago, they would never be visible in the front of the house. They might work in the finance office or someplace else. And you're now starting to see women show up in a public place in those hotels, which is a big transition in that culture. I think when you stand above it a little bit, we would say, obviously, we're going to comply with law, and so we need to respect local culture, clearly, but we can always be a safe place, and we can be a place where we can pursue every opportunity for our people, whether they be women, whether they be members of the LGBT community, whether they be something else, in a place where it is not friendly. I think increasingly folks in those communities say, I know I'm welcomed here, and that actually makes me feel even better about my work than I would if I didn't have that embrace. But in the fullness of time, hopefully we'll see that those cultural differences become less prominent, not more. We'll see.
Sure. In the time you've been with the company, I'm sure a lot of things have changed in terms of the biggest sort of hot button debates about workplace inclusion. Your team was good enough to share with me sort of the summary of the Take Care plan, that philosophy towards how you take care of your associates, and the word inclusion, inclusivity, inclusive workplace. That language is very much permeates the document, permeates the idea. How has that changed and evolved over the time you've been with the company, since the company has grown and changed so much?
Well, I think it's evolved significantly, although to some extent it is about the words we use, not the walk that we do every day. So you think about 90 years of being focused on building opportunities for folks, for everybody. And I think that has been consistent for a long time. So it might have been 25 years ago or 40 years ago that words like diversity and inclusion weren't used. But the company was in fact saying, all right, you may have started as a waiter in a root beer stand, but you can be a manager of a restaurant, or you can be a manager of a brand, or you can be a CFO of the company. Those are things that are available to you just like to anybody else. My first exposure to the Marriott board was in 1992. Before I got to the company, I'm a reformed lawyer and represented Marriott before going there. And the thing that struck me from the beginning is the board would never talk about the pedigree of executives. So it was never, well, they went to Wharton, or they went to HBS, or they came from P&G, or whatever it is. But it instead was, they started as a security guard, or they started as a waiter, and look at how their career has evolved. Those were the stories in the boardroom of pride. So that legacy, I think, is really important. I think more recently, we've used language around diversity and inclusion. I think maybe around the LGBT spaces, it's been most dramatic in recent years with gay marriage and with some of the public battles that have been fought. I think 10 years ago, our LGBT community would have been proud of Marriott, but not necessarily would they have heard words that were specific to the LGBT community. And I think today those words are there all the time. And members of that community will say, I feel so proud to be at Marriott because I know that Marriott has got my back. Whether it be the issues I face very locally day to day, or whether it be, Indiana or North Carolina or something else which is happening. Not surprisingly, today there's probably more anxiety than there was 2 or 3 years ago around diversity and inclusion broadly, which makes the hearing of those words that much more important.
Sure. I guess there's also some anxiety now. We've alluded earlier to the role that the hospitality industry has in creating opportunities for immigrants, and now there is for some of the immigrant community, some similar anxiety now. Has that required any kind of strategic pivot for you guys internally to adapt?
We're talking about immigration. We're talking obviously about travel policy too.
Sure.
And both are very much in sort of a relevant place today. Put aside personal politics. I won't talk about my own points of view here, but certainly what happened in our last election in the United States, among other things, is a fairly significant voice that says, I'm concerned about security, terrorism, and I don't really know how immigration works in the U.S. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know what the rules are. I don't feel like I've ever been brought into a consensus about how immigration works. Mm-hmm. And it can, of course, can be demagogued about, amnesty and other things. But put aside those fighting words, I think underneath that there is a total lack of consensus in the United States about what immigration rules should apply. Mm-hmm. And until we engage in those, it's not going to change. We will end up with voices being extreme on one side saying, we're a sanctuary city and we don't care what the immigration rules are. We're going to not enforce them in our place, and we're going to thumb our nose at the others. And you'll have some on the other side who say, throw them all out tomorrow. We don't care what kind of people they are. We don't care about anything. And until we basically say, okay, stop that, both of you. Let's instead look at, okay, what should our consensus be around immigration? How do we build that? We won't get to a place where we can get back to something that works for us. Maybe the best news here is not political, but it's economic. As we get towards a high employment economy, which is where we are today, you go to many of our cities, it's hard to find people. The voice will be louder and louder that we need to make sure that we think about, okay, what role does immigration play in that? And the voice which is fearful about loss of opportunities from those who oppose immigration, I think will become lesser and lesser, and maybe we can find an ability to get a conversation going.
Well, I imagine companies like yours that employ a fairly large workforce that is that diverse will have a lot of potentially leadership in that conversation. So
we'd like to have a voice, but right now it's not clear that you're doing much more than screaming into the wind.
Sure. So maybe we can just hope for a little less wind.
Cheers to that.
Good luck, yeah. We almost made it to the end of our time without me mentioning Airbnb.
Yeah.
But I do have to mention Airbnb. We talked a little bit earlier about the challenge of appealing to millennials, both in terms of reaching customers, especially if millennials are a little more willing to take a gamble on couch surfing, but also reaching new talent. When you're competing, when in theory every young, smart millennial wants to go work for Google,
yeah.
How does Marriott make itself appealing to millennials as talent?
Yeah.
Make itself appealing as an employer?
It's actually not. It's gotten better and better, and we have tremendous momentum with our younger associates. In fact, our internal survey data shows that our young people are as proud of their work with Marriott as the boomers or even the X's, and which is, I suspect it's a room full of experts, is a relatively unusual thing. Mm-hmm. Why? Authenticity matters, maybe particularly to new entrants to the workforce. Don't talk about stuff you really don't do, because if it's sort of corporate speak, I'm going to be turned off quickly. Secondly, we all increasingly love to travel and eat out. You look at Instagram and Snap and all the ways we share the things we're doing. What do we share? We share something about the way we travel and the way we entertain ourselves. This quest for experiences is more important than the quest for stuff, which influences us all as consumers, but I think influences people in where they want to work too. And thirdly, the change in the company, even in technology, is really exciting and powerful. So, we will sell well over $20 billion of rooms online this year on our .com site. We have one of the top 5 .com sites of any industry at all. And so we're investing hundreds of millions in technology. We're doing a lot on branding and new branding with, not just W we've had for some time, but Moxie and AC Hotels and Autograph and other things where we are really innovating in the space. And people want to be involved in change, and it's exciting. So I think we are as attractive as we've ever been to young people. They make me feel younger, which I need every day.
Yes.
And it's a fun time.
That's great. I hope you able to make the most of it and enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.